All right, here I am. Welcome to my second webinar. This one is titled, What is Servant Leadership? You see my name is Jeff Drozdowski, and if I haven't had an opportunity to meet you, I am glad that you have decided to join me on this webinar. Um, Over the last, especially a few months, just to give you a brief background, I get a lot of responses on my video blogs and my podcasts about different kinds of leadership, since my podcast and video blogs are about that. And the one that always gets the biggest response is this idea of servant leadership. So um, giving the people what they want is kind of the mantra. So I wanted to spend 45 minutes or so talking about servant leadership with those of you. And if you know somebody who couldn't make it on, please let them know. If they go to Droz Talks, they can get a link to the recording once I get it all edited and set up. And we'll be able to have those folks view this webinar as well. So very excited to be with you. And we are going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is talk about me. I see my head is covering my head there, so I will move. And a little bit about me. I grew up in Michigan, still live in Michigan. Very cold out, as many of you have heard about. And I never wish upon my enemies what it feels like to be 15 degrees below zero with 30-degree wind chills. It's scary stuff. So growing up in Michigan, I played a lot of sports, but my sport was baseball. And baseball took me all the way through high school and allowed me to go to college. I got a scholarship to play at Central Michigan University, and we had a very successful program there, and very excited to have gotten my degree from Central Michigan in public speaking, believe it or not. And I was the first one in my family to go to college, four-year college anyway. From there, after I graduated, I migrated more or less to the restaurant industry and spent 30 years in the restaurant industry, primarily as a trainer, somebody standing in front of a group and talking about whatever product it was for the companies that I was working for. But I also was in operations and did pretty well-rounded as far as everything that the restaurant industry has involved. It was quite a half-life, so to speak, 30 years. Not quite half-life, but anyway, I'll move on. I never like to tell people how old I am. Author. So in 2015, I started getting this idea that I wanted to give more back. And one of the ways that I thought I could give more back is rely on the experiences that I had in my life. And a book came bubbling up from inside me, and it was called Inspired, How Our Differences Are Changing the Workplace. And you see a picture of me there and that little bubble holding the book at the place where I did most of my writing at the local Starbucks. So the whole idea with authoring a book was to get a business off the ground, and it started with the book. DrozTalks.com started with the book, and it has evolved and it has grown and it has turned into speaking, and that is my primary passion and love, is to be in front of people speaking. I love sharing messages, but I just also love being on stage, to be honest with you. It's a wonderful place for me, and I love speaking about two keynotes that I'll talk to you about at the end of the webinar here. So Droz Talks has turned from author and motivational speaker into video blogging and also podcasting. And again, we'll talk about those at the end in more detail and tell you how you can find those if you so choose. So the topic is servant leadership. I'm going to move myself down here just so I'm not distracting. And the thing about servant leadership is it's not a new idea. And as we move along here, I'll show you the agenda and exactly, in parts of this, we'll talk about where and when this really got started and how it gained in popularity. So Along with servant leadership, there is this idea called transformational leadership. And these two topics are the two topics that are the two leadership styles that are really growing and coming alive here, and they are really big on the radar for 2019. And that's another reason why I wanted to talk about servant leadership today. And perhaps in another webinar, we'll talk about transformational leadership. But these are the two that are trending. So wanted to help all of you out there stay up to date on what's going on in the world of leadership. So here's our agenda. I'll throw them all out there for you. The first thing is just going to go back a little bit, give you an opportunity to compare and contrast servant leadership compared to some other styles. Traditional leadership is where a lot of those styles lie. So we'll go over those briefly. Then we'll give you a little history on servant leadership, who has benefited from this idea of servant leadership, perhaps restaurants or companies. And then we'll dig into the meat and potatoes, and that is the 6 principles of servant leadership. How to apply with today's worker is toward the end, and then we'll talk about next steps. So wanted to make sure that that you understand what we're going to be going through here today. So on we go, ladies and gentlemen. Let us talk about traditional leadership. Traditional leadership styles. There's 4 of them that we're going to touch on here. The first one is autocratic. And autocratic has been around for quite a while, especially in the 20th century. It was very strong, I think, because of the influence that all of the wars in the 20th century that were going on. And it was a very do as I say kind of country at that time, because many people were in the military in that time. So that influence of the military idea or autocratic style kind of leaked out into society in general. So autocratic is very centralized. There's a boss, and the boss likes to take in information and not share much information like you see here. Very little feedback, and many times it's negative. In today's world, autocratic is a very difficult style that many people deal with. Really any generation, autocratic is difficult. The second one is laissez-faire, kind of a polar opposite of the autocratic, and that is the laissez-faire leader gives the employees complete employee empowerment, allows them to do what they need to do to get the job done. The problem with laissez-faire is there's not a lot of oversight, and if the team gets off track on what their goals are, then the laissez-faire type of leader needs to bring those people back in. And sometimes that's difficult because the personality type of somebody with a laissez-faire style is not to be bold and moving people in a particular direction. They're not particularly strong leaders, so to speak. So the third one is the democratic style, and that is many people are involved in the decision-making process. Democratic style, I had an opportunity to be involved in here recently. I was in a group of about 12 people, and they were helping put together a presentation for a larger group that will be coming up. And there was about 12 people in the room, and over the period of 3 or 4 days, so many opinions and so many ideas being thrown around. Now, it was a great group, and we eventually came to a conclusion, but because of so many people involved in the decision making, it took longer. And a lot of times, time is of the essence, and democratic doesn't always work. And then the third is transactional, the fourth is transactional. Transactional is more apparent type of leadership style in the world of sales or in the worlds where production means everything. So as you can see here, you got the button for reward or punish. And if we'll say a car salesman, if a car salesman does well, then they are given awards, prizes, vacations. They're given all kinds of different things because ownership is showing them their satisfaction. Now, if the worst salesperson in the car dealership continues to be the worst, then they are punished, whether that would be working difficult hours, but more likely it is they probably get weeded out because they're just not a good salesperson. So sales or transactional type of leadership is part of the traditional leadership style. And like I mentioned, if they don't meet expectations, they are punished. And a lot of times it is they need to find another job. Okay, so on we go to a little bit more information about servant leadership. I touched on this earlier. It is one of the two trending styles in today's workforce, especially in the US. I know that I have people overseas that watch this, and perhaps you are a little bit more advanced in these topics, maybe not, but learn them, leaders, and even if you don't buy in totally to this idea of servant leadership, you can apply that to a leadership style which blends more than one type of style, and that will be beneficial as well. Transformational is the other leadership style. All right, so servant leader, and the idea of servant leader is this. The leader who upends the power pyramid. So in the power pyramid, you have we'll say the CEO is up on the top here, and it goes down to vice presidents and maybe senior vice presidents, directors, on down. And the first leader thinks about leadership in that fashion. The servant leader thinks about it in opposite. They kind of flip that pyramid around. They empower the people that work for them. They help them develop. And not only do they help them develop, but they help them develop professionally and personally. And as you'll see with the kind of people that are in the workplace now, servant leadership is very important to those out in the work world. Servant leaders put the others, the people that work for them, their needs first. Now, this has slowly grown in popularity, and it goes way back in history, like you'll see here in just a little bit. But the idea of servant leadership grew in popularity from a gentleman by the name of Robert Greenleaf back in the 1970s. We'll talk about Robert here. Now, I touched on this also, but the servant leader type of style is effective with the country's largest workforce now, and those are the millennials. And we've probably all heard many times about millennials and their needs and their wants and how different they are than not Gen Z, but the Gen Y group and the baby boomers, and they are different. So this leadership style really works for them. And if you're not sure the time frame for millennials, it's 1981 to 1996-ish. And then there's Generation Z, who from 1997 through 2015 make up the next generation. And those folks are already in the workplace now as well. So it is effective with these two types of generations that are coming up. All right, so the history of servant leadership. Here is a picture of the gentleman who gets all the credit for servant leadership, at least modern day servant leadership, and this is Robert Greenleaf. Now, the original idea of servant leadership goes all the way back to ancient Chinese times, 2,500 years ago, a gentleman by the name of Lao Tzu. Now, Lao Tzu was actually a mentor of somebody that you may be more familiar with, and that is Confucius. So Confucius was so blown away by the wisdom of Lao Tzu that he took a lot of Lao Tzu's teachings and applied that into his philosophies as well. But this goes back 2,500 years from the gentleman by the name of Lao Tzu. But again, it was brought into prominence in the 1970s by Robert Greenleaf. And Robert Greenleaf, a very interesting person, and we'll get into his history here in just a little bit too. So first, onto this idea of servant leadership, and I wanted to show you how much that it's grown. So here are just 3 books, and if you go on Amazon or you just Google servant leader, you will see dozens and dozens of books on this topic of servant leadership. So just 3 here. If you're looking at the screen like I am, on the left-hand side, the one that's in red by Robert Neuschel, I believe is how you say it, The Servant Leader. The one in the middle is by Robert Greenleaf, and that is The Servant Leader Within. And then The Servant Leader, again, talked about by Ken Blanchard. And if you're not familiar with Ken Blanchard, just think about the 1-minute manager that's been around forever, but still so applicable today. So they've all written on this idea of servant leadership. So why is this idea exploding? What is the big deal about servant leadership and the other one, transformational leadership? So there are 2 pervasive theories right now about why these theories or these type of styles are so important now. The theories are this: the picture that depicts those 2 folks there with the martini and all the money represents corporate America, especially publicly traded corporate America. And in publicly traded corporate America, if you're not familiar with it, it really is immediate gratification. It's always about the next quarter's profit margins. The idea of developing employees into lifelong or maybe semi-lifelong employees of that particular company don't exist in those environments. So the idea of servant leadership is a pushback against this idea of publicly traded satisfaction first ideas. And then the second one there is that group again. It's the millennials walking down the street. And again, just because of the way that they were brought up and maybe the way that they've seen generations from before, they have certain needs and wants that the servant leadership style really appeals to them. So those are the 2 theories, and I'm sure there are more, but these are 2 key ones that I have identified as we have gone along here. So some fast facts about servant leadership. First idea or fact is that it's serve first. Now, that doesn't mean that we lay everything down and don't talk about getting work done, okay? It is in a productive work environment where you serve first. So there is the leader first style also, and that one is more interested in a power grab for influence and material possessions. The full servant leader and full leader first are the 2 extremes. The extreme of servant leader being not worrying about anything else besides the well-being of your employees. The other extreme being it's all about power, influence, profitability, and material possessions. Most successful leaders find the balance between those 2 and make that happen. I just disappeared for a second, so you don't have to see me take a slug of my coffee there. And I am back. So on we go. Soon as I can get, there we go. All right. So here is a quote by Robert Greenleaf. The servant leader is servant first. It begins with the natural feeling, so something that comes instinctual or natural feeling that one wants to serve or to serve first. Then conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. That person is sharply different from one who is leader first. And again, those are 2 extremes. In my opinion, it's the ones in the middle that find the success. So how do you know if your servant leadership style is working? Let's take a litmus test. So let's say that you haven't done servant leadership in your company or organization, and now you are going to put that into practice. There's a couple of litmus tests to let you know whether your ideas on this is working. And the first one is, are your people that you're serving growing as persons and employees? Are they getting better? And then the second one is, do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what they do is they take the ball and run with it. So after you have provided all of that servant leadership to them, they get turned on by this idea of servant leadership, and they carry that ball forward and become a servant leader themselves. So those are 2 quick ways to find out whether your servant leadership is working. All right, so here are some companies or organizations that are associated with servant leadership. The first one is, and believe it or not, the United States Marines. I give a little extra love to the Marines at the end of this webinar. There's the Ritz-Carlton. Now, the Ritz-Carlton, briefly, because I know we still need to get to the big six, gives their employees up to $3,000 to take care of customer service issues. That's right. Each and every person at that hotel has a expense account, so to speak, of $3,000 to take care of a customer to make sure that they leave satisfied. Amazing. All right. Third one is Starbucks. Starbucks in the news quite a bit lately with the level of pay for their employees and their benefits, and their founder, Howard Schultz, potentially running for president of the United States. The next one is Chick-fil-A, a little tough to see there. I'm going to see if I can't move this down a little bit. I can move it around. Okay. So Chick-fil-A is maybe one that you haven't thought of as far as servant leadership is concerned. But they do an amazing job. And coming from the restaurant industry, I can tell you that they are so well thought of when it comes to servant leadership and leading their employees. It really is amazing. And then lastly, ones that you probably had thought about before is, let me do that here, Whole Foods. If you're not familiar with Whole Foods, they kind of came into prominence thinking outside the box a little bit with the kind of food that is served at grocery stores. So they're more organically based, and they do serve meat, so the meat is taken, the animals are taken care of very humanely during that process. So Whole Foods gets kudos for servant leadership as well. So let's move into these 6 principles of servant leadership. I hope you guys are ready. I see I've got a couple of questions. I'm not going to be able to take too many at the end, but I will be able to take a few, so thank you for that. Also, here onto the 6 principles of servant leadership. The first one is called conceptualization. Now, conceptualization, defined as forming an idea or process about something. Now, as an entrepreneur or a leader, you have to think about your department, or maybe you have to think about your, if you are a company owner, and you have to think about the next steps for your company and what you can do to improve it and how you can increase the sales in it, how you can just be a more successful company. An ideal servant leader who conceptualizes is this guy here, Richard Branson. Sir Richard Branson, if you follow anything in England. And if you're not sure who he is, think Virgin Air, Virgin Records. Very interesting man, owns over 400 companies. Not all of them are gangbusters in sales and popularity, but the guy is just an incredible person. Now, his idea here, in quotes, servant leadership develops employees on all levels and frees the leader to dream future ideas to improve the company. So you have a vision, leaders, and you conceptualize how to get there. And as your company starts to grow, or your department starts to grow, now you can bring in other people. And when you bring in those employees, now you can develop them through servant leadership and give them the tools and give them the opportunity to be successful. And that allows and frees you as the leader or company owner to start thinking outside the box and to start thinking about what's next. What's next? I've got these great employees. They're taking care of all those things that maybe I don't like to do, or maybe takes up too much of my time. And now I can, now I can free my mind to do other things and think about things in different ways to make my company more successful. So do you think that this idea works? Yeah, it does. It works every day. Quick story for you here, and I'm going to tell you about this conceptualization example by one of the great servant leaders that I'm familiar with, and for confidentiality's sake, we will call him Stan. Now, Stan started in one of the restaurant industry companies that did not have a training department, or a very small training department, and Stan became director of that department. many people within that organization did not agree that Stan should be in that director position. So he was fighting against that to begin with, but Stan had an idea, and Stan conceptualized, and Stan grew that department, and Stan made that company's training department extremely successful. The next step that Stan did is he hired a bunch of really great people and gave them the tools to be productive in the workplace, did that, but also was their servant leader. So Stan did extraordinary work into making sure that his people felt valued, wanted, and made sure that he developed them as much as he could on a personal level as well, and grew that department and grew that department. And really that department became one of the most well-respected departments in the restaurant industry. And this is a true story. So kudos to Stan, and kudos to the ideal of conceptualization in the servant leadership realm. So the second thing is building a sense of community. So servant leaders build a sense of community. Now, a company that really buys into the whole idea of servant leadership is this company called the Container Store. And frankly, I didn't know much about the Container Store till I did some research. And they work with boxes and packaging and things along those lines. And they're quite successful. And their mantras, their ideas on employees is the same as it would be for customers. Basically, take care of your employees, and your employees will take care of your customers. So they are servant leadership as well. They are in the Fortune 500 realm. Now, just to show you the success, they have 20% turnover. And in any industry, at least most industries, 20% turnover is incredible. Part of it is their pay structure, part of it is the benefits, but it's mostly that the leadership within the Container Store is servant leader first, taking care of their people, giving them an opportunity to be productive, developing them personally as well as professionally. They call it the yummy culture, or the good culture to be in, as opposed to the icky culture. So those may not be words that you would use or I would use, but they have a yummy culture, and that's what they like to call it. So we'll respect that. The third one is, folks, is the ability to be persuasive. Yes, persuasive as a servant leader, and their ethics when it comes to persuasion. So there is a science to persuasion, but it's how you do it. And the items that you can get out of your employees, because you can be persuasive to them. One of the all-time great persuaders is this guy by the name of Steve Jobs. And I know by researching and reading up on Steve Jobs that there is more than one person. There are dozens of people that talk about his power of persuasion. He was an incredibly intelligent man, obviously. But he was able to persuade people to do things that they wouldn't even dream that they'd be able to do. So how? How did he do that? Persuasion is psychology. So he used some of these techniques, and these are techniques that you can use too. But again, there's a level of ethics that needs to be. So if you're going to use these levels of persuasion, use them in a professional, productive environment and not to manipulate people. And so the first one is mimicry, or to mimic somebody. And studies in psychology show that if you take on the actions of somebody that you're talking to, maybe the way that they sit in the chair, maybe their hand actions, maybe the level of eye contact that they have, that they look at you more positively. The second one is social influence, and that is giving people the idea that, I guess for lack of a better term, folks, all the cool kids are doing it, right? So that type of influence, or maybe even call it peer pressure, but it's getting people to think that society in general is going to be doing this, and we need to do this as well. The third one is reciprocity, and that is doing the same thing for somebody that has done something for you. So, okay, and then there's the first place syndrome, and that is giving people the idea that this thing that's going to that's going to happen, or this idea that we're using at work is state of the art, cutting edge, and very exciting. And we have to be the first people to get there, because if we're not going to be the first people to get there, then we're not going to be in first place. We're not going to be cutting edge. We're not going to be a great company, because we're always lagging behind. So that is, there are different names for this, but I like to call it the first place syndrome. All right, number 4, personal and professional growth. So personal and professional growth, servant leaders believe that if you create the right values and culture, normal people will do extraordinary things. So you not only grow your folks personally, but professionally. Encourage your employees to professionally grow. Now, how do you do that? Now, we're putting you, let's take your thought process and we'll put it into your company environment. So you want to get started with servant leadership. How do you do that? Here's some ideas. The first thing is maybe hire a coach, not just a personal coach for one person, but maybe a coach that can coach many people. It may be an expensive venture, but if you have a coach available to all of your employees, that will help them personally grow. There are personal coaches and professional coaches. The second one is setting goals. Let's take smoking as an example. You can have a stop smoking group, support group within the context of your company, so people can sit down and work on their personal development to stop smoking. So have that goal set for your people, and you do that by setting up classes or things like that to help them personally grow. And then the third thing is to encourage your people to invest in themselves. And there are different ways to do this. Financially, there is by having 401k for you to help them invest financially, but also to help them invest in themselves on different levels, whether that would be exercise, whether that would be just learning new items, maybe having some after work classes to help them develop. Okay, number 5, empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the thoughts or feelings of one another. Now, there actually are 3 different levels or 3 different kinds of empathy that I have identified that I'd like to share with you. They are up here on the top. The first one is cognitive. The second one is emotional. And the third one is compassionate. So cognitive is on a mental level. So you can consciously see that somebody, whatever is going on with them, you can see that and you can relate to it, perhaps because it's happened to you before. So the second one is emotional, and that means putting yourself in their shoes emotionally. So if you know somebody who's had a death in the family, you can say, oh my gosh, they've had a death in the family, and you've had a death in the family, then you can put yourself in their shoes and help them through a difficult time because you know what it feels like. And then thirdly is compassionate empathy. Compassionate empathy is understanding a person's difficulty and being moved to help. So here's 3 quick phrases and words to help you remember this idea of empathy. The first is cognitive, is see it. The second one is feel it. And the third one is act on it. See it, feel it, act on it. Those are the 3 empathy levels that people feel. Now, servant leaders, you need to be able to have that empathy in order to be able to react to your people accordingly. We had, in my previous career, a death of one person that was very close to it. When we found out about it, we were shocked. We understood that this person died, but we couldn't believe it. But we felt it as well. And we reached out to his loved ones and let them know that, we can help any way that we can because we understand what they're going through. And then thirdly was acting on it. So we called them and we went to the funeral and the wake and gave them support before, during, and after that very difficult time. So you as a leader, if people understand your employees understand that you know what they are going through, that helps you immensely in their eyes as far as respect is concerned. Number 6 was actually awareness. So there are 2 types of awareness. The first one is physical awareness, and that is actually doing what you're asking your employees to do. Now, in one of my keynotes about leadership, I have this thing called wash your dishes. And basically what I'm telling the leaders in that audience to do is to lead by example, to do things that you're willing to ask people to do, but also willing to do that yourself. In the restaurant world, washing your dishes is one of those things that is kind of a menial task, and it's for new employees. Or if you can go into the back of a restaurant and wash dishes with your employees, that helps them know that you're there to serve them and to be right there with them. So there's physical awareness. And the second one is mental and emotional awareness. Now, how do you do that? Mental and emotional awareness, again, really goes back to empathy. And that is being able to understand what somebody is going through and how to know how they're feeling on an emotional level. So I go back to restaurants a lot. Sometimes I go back to sports, but I go back to restaurants because that's where a lot of my experience is. So as a restaurant manager, working in that environment for a long time, you know the struggles that people go through trying to get to work, when they're at work, the business in general. So you understand that on a mental level, but you also know how stressful it can be on an emotional level. And if people just know that you understand that you're aware of the feelings and emotions and struggles that they're going through, that puts you in a position of being a servant leader, and people will respect you a lot more. Now, I want to get on to honorable mention. And again, I just want to check real quick and make sure we're doing good on time, which we are, folks. How cool is this? This is Colonel Tom Doman, a retired colonel from the United States Marine Corps. And Tom just happens to be a friend of mine, but he's also a wealth of knowledge when it comes to something that I'm not familiar with, and that's the military. So we have sat on several occasions, and he has told me so many stories. But one of the things that struck me the most about his time in the Marine Corps is servant leader. I had no idea that the Marine Corps had a servant leader mentality. And he shared stories about why it's so important that they help each other out, and the bond that that Marines have once they leave the Corps is really unbreakable. And that's because they serve each other. Not only do the generals lead the colonels and the colonels lead on down, but they serve each other on their individual levels as well. And one of the key points that Colonel Doman has always told me is unselfish. Lives are in your hands in the Marines. So you have to be thinking about the well-being of yourself as well as your fellow soldiers in order to survive many of those battles in the environment that Marines are in. Okay, so let's talk about next steps. Now, this is a lot of information, and I'm not saying that you become a full-fledged servant leader all the way onto that one extreme, but taking ideas from servant leadership and applying it to your people is really, really important. You got to have that balance. You got to be able to be productive, no question about it, but you also need to develop your people both personally and professionally. So what do? What's the first thing that you do with any big idea is you got a plan. You got to conceptualize, right? You got to conceptualize just like the first step was in what we were talking about here today. So you got a plan. Start with 3 things. Okay, you're like, well, Jeff, how can I start? Where do I start? What can I do for my employees to let them know that I'm here to serve them? Right off at the top, do something nice, do something special for them. Have a dinner out with your employees. If you have a big department, maybe it's something where they pay in a small amount and you pay in the majority of it, if cost is an issue. If it's not, take them out to dinner. That Stan guy that I was telling you about earlier, during the holiday times, didn't matter how big the department was, Stan was always incredibly generous financially and just with gifts, it was amazing, the level of gratitude he had for his employees. Take them to dinner. Have a special company function, a party, whatever you envision as being a good time for your employees. I emceed an event back earlier, actually it was late 2018, for a bank in Albany, New York. And it was a thank you for a year well done at this particular bank, and they had a blast. And we played games, and it was great. We just had a great time, and I, again, just happened to be the MC for that. And then the third thing that you can do to get things kicked off is to have somebody come into your company or organization, either to do a keynote like you see here, or to do some training on servant leadership. This is a presentation that I did on servant leadership for the United Way in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. And if you can see the background a little bit, quality of the picture is not the best. Sorry about that, I understand. But it does say leader, and you see a picture of one person pulling up another. So we did talk about servant leadership. The United Way appreciated it. It was a great time. But bringing somebody into keynote is a great kickoff too, especially if you're setting the table to begin this servant leadership style. So let's talk about takeaways. The first thing is servant leadership is trending, along with transformational leadership. So servant leadership is trending. The next one is we talked about those 6. You can go back and check them all out again. On my next video blog, I'll touch on them again if you want to see them. But those of you who have seen this, you have the recording, and go back and check out those 6 too. And then we talked about the next steps. So questions. During this period of time, I did have a couple of questions in that were written down for me. Thank you very much. So let's see. The first one comes from somebody named Jackie. The biggest mistake that servant leaders make. The biggest mistake that servant leaders make is going over to so far an extreme of being a servant leader that they let the employees take advantage of them, that they want to be liked, that they want to do everything that they can for their people, that they kind of get lost as far as what their goal is in their company or their organization. So it's finding that balance of servant leadership, and whether you call it leader first or productive leader, whatever you would like to call it, that is the biggest mistake, and that is a mistake that a lot of young people make as well. So very good question, Jackie. I appreciate that. This question is from Marcel. So Marcel, this question, kind of the same as what Jackie said. Where can servant leaders fail? And we did touch on that also. So let's see. All right, one more here, and this is from Bill. How can I become a better servant leader? Well, there are many different ways to do it. Let me give you a quick 3, okay? So the first one is your listening skills. Listening is huge. People respect you so much more if they know at the very least that you're willing to listen to them, whether you agree with what their issues are or not. So the first one is to listen. The second one is to develop your people. And don't look at them as pawns in a chess game. Look at them as real, live, living people that have goals and dreams, and develop that. Be the nurturer of those goals and dreams. And again, you can do that on a professional level. You can do that on a personal level. And then number 3, folks, is to collaborate. If you're the type of leader where you go into an environment, you say you go into a meeting and you don't want to hear anything that anybody else has to say. You just want to dictate. That's not collaboration. That's being an autocratic leader. Today's largest group that's in the workplace, the millennials, collaboration is huge with them. And if you don't believe it, look at the way that office environments are being created now for wide open spaces and less walls and more collaboration. Because companies are finding out through these millennials and Gen Zers that collaboration can be a very positive thing. So I have a special offer for you today, and that is if you book me for a speaking event or training session that will occur between today, February 1st, 2019, and July 1st, 2019, you're going to get 30% off of my speaking or training fees and any kind of training materials that I may bring with me or that I may need to provide. Or if you would like to purchase books for your group or organization, I'll give you 30% off those totals. So again, my name, Jeff Drozdowski. My website is droztalks.com. And there you find a lot of different things. You find information about my keynotes, you find out information about my video blogs, you find information about the podcast. You can respond in any of those as well if you hop onto the blog area. So I definitely appreciate that. My email address is jeff@droztalks.com. My trusty business partner is Lucas at droztalks.com, and that's Lucas with a K. Lucas is a great guy. Lucas helps me with bookings and can answer any other questions that you might have about droztalks.com. But he is my go-to person. Thank you, Lucas. I mentioned the podcast, and there's my podcast album cover. So if you look for podcasts by album cover, this is what you will see, the Drozcast, speaking of motivation and leadership. And these are my social media outlets. In order that I spend the most time on, YouTube and LinkedIn go hand in hand. They are where I'm at most of the time. Facebook, to a little bit lesser degree, although I do post quite a bit there. And then on Instagram, I am becoming more of an Instagram person each and every day. So if you want anything in regards to videos from the video blog, go onto my YouTube channel, easy enough, Jeff Drozdowski, and check those out. And then just look for me out there for the different links and the other social media outlets. So I am Jeff Drozdowski.